Hey, we're live.
All right, very good. Hey, everybody, Dawn Zoldai here, and this is your full crew. I am one of your
And
co-hosts.
I'm Mike Peel, your other co-host. We've got some great articles we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be doing a deep dive into autonomous systems. We're going to take a look at ROS 2 and what its significance is for the robot operating system. Then we're going to be taking a look at F-16s that are getting retrofitted with autonomous systems. So that should be interesting. And we're going to be ending the show with a discussion about the Italian DPA possibly banning ChatGPT, or at least fining OpenAI. So we've got some great guests to talk about these things today. We're going to start with Pramod. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, thanks, Mike. Thanks, Don. My name is Pramod Raheja. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Airgility, where we build some of the most autonomous drones on the planet right now. Our focus is on an AI and autonomous systems operating system, and we believe that autonomous AI is the future of uncrewed systems.
Well, excited to have you on. And we also have Katherine Scott. So, Kat, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, yeah, so I'm Katherine Scott. I am one of the developer advocates over at Intrinsic, but that doesn't describe my role quite well. I'm generally the developer advocate for ROS 2, Gazebo, and I help with, generally ROS and Gazebo
excited
development.
to finally have you on, Kat. You should check out a great interview Ramon Roche from Drone Code did with Kat in Kyoto. So look that up, Drone Code, Katherine Scott. But we're going to be starting today with Pramod's article. And so tell us why you wanted to take a deep dive into autonomous systems and what's up in this VentureBeat article.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this article, I thought, did a great job of kind of giving I'd say, an intro primer into autonomous AI. And what it does is it really says, hey, the future of robotic systems is autonomous AI. So I read as an example, I read an article just over the weekend. I think it was a DJI blog post, and it talked about sort of the future is bright, the sky's the limit for drone pilots. And this may be controversial with some of the people listening, but I don't believe that at all. I believe that our drones are going to turn into robots, and that we're going to have operators that operate and take over when they need to. But the drone will essentially, or the robot, as we like to call it, we don't even use the word drone in our company. The robot will actually make decisions and do things. So this article kind of talks about cars as an example. However, it applies to any robot, whether that's flying robot, undersea robot, it doesn't really matter. And so I picked that article so we can have a nice discussion around that. And it does a very good job of explaining things.
Well, you're no stranger to these systems, Kat. So want to tell us a little bit about robots and autonomous systems in the future?
Yeah, so I went with the article that we actually published, I want to say about 6 months ago. So the original sort of ROS paper was getting
Hold on,
long.
sorry to interject, Kat, but what do you think about Pramod's article?
Oh, what do I think of Pramod's article?
Excited to talk about more robots. But yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. So, generally I tend to agree that robots, calling a drone a robot is both correct, but also that it's, we see, just as much as we see more AI, which is kind of a nebulous term, we see people basically being enabled a little bit more when working with robots. So you see systems where, well, the robot can only, or the AI, the deep learning sort of thing, can only solve problems, say 95% of the time. And it really is just getting rid of the common cases for people. But you're still going to have sort of end corner cases where people have to step in and control a robot.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by sometimes I want to call them overzealous projections of what things can do, because we truly see an amazing progression of capabilities. Some seem more rapid than others, but yeah, I think understanding where the human's going to be in the loop is actually important for the advancements of these technologies, so that they could be deployed responsibly, that we could keep our good reputation among them. And ultimately, the future is bright if we do that. Dom, what were you going to say?
Well, I have a couple things to say. Number one, Pramod, I love this article because it's really a great kind of autonomous AI 101 for everybody. It's in plain language. It talks about the main jobs of sensing, fusion, perception, planning, and control. It also talks about the different levels of autonomous AI vehicle guidance. And we've seen this, right? NHTSA has put this out, but it speaks about level 0 through level 5. And what I really love is it actually ties into some of the other things we talked about in previous Full Crew episodes. Some of these vehicle companies are out there putting these vehicles on the road, right? So you have, in the articles discusses Cruise Automation, which is a GM startup building fully autonomous versions of the Chevy Bolt and deploying them in cities. And then Alphabet's division created that Waymo driver. You've seen cars, if you've been to, where was I? Texas, Austin, like driving around with the traditional car, having this thing on the top, helping to automate that ride. Also, they put out a ride hailing service called Waymo One in Phoenix and things like this. So the article talks about Apple, Oracle, IBM, some of these big companies, some other startups like Wave, not the one that, does the traffic things, the navigation app, but WAY. Maybe it's WAYVE. Yeah, WAYVE, Argo, and AI. All startups doing different aspects of this and where this could go. But I'm with you, Pramod. I just got my fun fact. I just got my drone pilot's license, Part 107, and I've been a little frightened to kind of go out with my drone, to be honest with you, because I don't have really anybody here to go with me. I really would prefer to have a visual observer, and I would love to be able to push a button and not have to focus on my little tiny phone and all the kinds of things to fly this thing manually. If it could fly and I could program it and then I could take beautiful pictures, that would be my ideal state. So looking forward to that at some point.
Yeah, well, I think, and I agree with everything you said. Congrats on getting your drone license. And what I was going to say is that, when the article does, like you said, it's a great 101. And it actually breaks down the levels of autonomy. So when we talk to prospects and clients, a lot of times they don't know those levels, right, necessarily. And you'd be surprised that, and I think this sometimes the marketing is a little bit misleading too. So for example, I drive a Tesla and I have, but guess what?
Autopilot, right?
Yeah. Guess what though? It's not full self-driving. It's probably it's probably a level 1 or 2. I still have to, I have to pay attention. I'm still in the loop quite a bit. In fact, there's a lot of edge cases still. So where you're going to frustrate other drivers behind you if you just completely depended on their full self-driving. So there's still a ways to go. The other thing I think that the article does a good job of, it says, look, there's different ways of doing this. Like Waymo, I think, has almost like a module, right, that you put on something. And so I do think that's where the future is going, where you're going to have sort of like almost a separate product that now gets, within reason, it's not going to be able to be used with everything, but within reason, with the right hardware, that you can now put software on almost any other vehicle. And I think Kat was going to say something, so I'll let Kat jump in.
Well, I think, with respect to vehicles, things are, I think it's going to be more of a slow progression rather than something that's just off and on. And you'll see these different levels. Now, the marketing behind them is different, is completely different, right? And I think organizations that have more experience with safety, right? So if you look at some of the GM vehicles, for example, they have probably equivalent levels of autonomy, but they don't market it as full self-driving. It's driver assist, and they have very, very particular, safety interlocks on those vehicles to prevent people from just like doing the wrong thing with that technology, which is to say, like, press a button and fall asleep and then have the vehicle do whatever it wants, which is not a place where we're at just yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing I'll add is, when the article talks about it breaks down sort of the autonomous systems, right, of sensing. So you have to actually sense the input, and then you have to fuse those inputs together to some model that you could perceive. And then the computer then has to be able to plan and control things, right? So one thing I'll add to that is that you have a lot of examples, and I know Kat probably has lots of these examples now, where you're doing things in a, we'll say, a set setting where the there's not a whole lot of randomness, right? And things are predictable. And I will say also that and a lot of people get confused between automation and autonomy. They're two different things, right? I might have a unique perspective being a manned aircraft pilot with many hours and many different types of aircraft types, and many things that autopilots do in airplanes are automation, not necessarily autonomy, where they do one task really well. Well, not always really well, but reasonably well, and then that's it, right? And so you still have to very much be in the loop. And so yeah, just to give you a little bit of context there.
Yeah, I just want to call out some messages from the chat real quick. We got our super fan, Christopher Jenseth. Good morning. Joaquin Royable. He joined us not that long ago, so I hope he becomes another super fan. He's also saying good morning. And Desi says, woohoo, congrats, Dawn, let's fly.
Can't wait.
Yeah, I definitely agree that the marketing can sometimes cloud things, and I think we'll end up talking about that multiple times throughout this episode. Dawn, did you have any last thoughts?
No, like I said, I think, look, as a lawyer, the only thing I'll add is it's always better to underpromise and overdeliver. And if you tell people something is fully autonomous, and like Kat said, they fall asleep. We've seen this happen with Tesla. Some of the lawsuits, some of the tragic accidents, and so saying this is assisted driving, I think, is absolutely a better way to go, not just from a marketing standpoint, but from a legal standpoint too. So yeah.
Yeah, well, also like statistics manipulation, right? So even when they reviewed the crashes, it wasn't clear if the autopilot was shutting off because it wanted the driver to be blamed, or it was shutting off because an actual failure had happened. So even in like the autopsy of those crashes, I think it's important to have as much, I guess, oversight over the reality of what's happening, so we could actually roll these systems out safely to more people. What were you going to say, Pramod?
Well, I was just going to say that, yeah, even in our case, we're building AI and autonomy software that you could that becomes hardware agnostic, but you still need a piece of hardware to be put on. So we've designed something called, as an example, a collision reduction avoidance black box. So we're not saying you're completely collision resistant in this case with this specific piece of hardware and software that can be put on another drone, but you're getting probably 10 levels better than you were, but it's still not 100% perfect, right?
Kat, you had something?
Great point.
Oh, I was going to say, you guys were talking about seeing one or two cars. I live in San Francisco. We have probably 6, 7, 8 different vehicles, but the one I won't mention what particular vendor this was, but when I lived in the city, we counted once, and I think I said, wow, I think we've seen this particular kind of autonomous vehicle go by my house at least 8 times an hour.
Wow.
This is with somebody in the vehicle, but you sort of back calculate, and you're like, okay, and I see them in the middle of the night, I see them in the day. So if they're just running the same circuit all day, every day, is that really providing? I mean, it provides a data set. It provides a okay data set, but I really sometimes wonder if it provides a diverse enough and sufficient data set for the application.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I actually think we're going to end up touching on that again later when we get to my article. Being able, but we'll get into it there, because at some point you're promising accuracy that doesn't actually fit a real diverse real world application, because there's a lot more that you could run into, and that's usually where the problems happen, right? Are the edge cases. So
and in the case of autonomous vehicle, literally run into.
Yeah.
Right. So that's
we had one hit a bus yesterday, or like a week ago.
Right. When these systems fail, they fail spectacularly in ways that humans wouldn't, right? That's always the thing. You're like, how did you come up with that nonsense answer? So yeah, that's going to be part of the process while we refine these things, for sure. But I don't know. We're just going to have to figure it out as we go. And I think Dawn is right. GM's play is one of caution, because they've been around for a lot of lawsuits. I think their legal team understands how to actually manage risk. And let's face it, vehicles kill people a lot. you're going fast, you're up against physics. So if they figured it out how to manage that legal liability by now, I would trust that they might actually have better insights on that than a newer manufacturer, to be honest. All right, well.
Oh, sorry. So we'll give this a redo. So I basically, this is a paper that we published, or Open Robotics published about 6 months ago. There was a sort of canonical ROS paper published well over a decade ago that sort of outlined what we were planning to do, how ROS functioned. And since we created a whole new version, we figured it was about time to sort of put pen to paper and record all of the changes and improvements to ROS 2. But in particular, this wasn't like a paper where we said, this is what we're going to do. We actually waited until we had a sufficient number of versions of ROS 2 out in the wild and people using it. So first we talk about all the parts that are in there, how we changed it, how we improved ROS 2 over ROS 1, and then we go through and sort of outline 5 different users that have been using ROS 2 from different sort of subdomains of robotics. So we chose land, sea, air, space, and at least one industrial application. And so the article, like if you're trying to understand ROS 2 or get a you want a primer to sort of, I have no idea what I'm talking about, I want to know more about this ROS 2 thing, it's a good start. It's a little, it's an academic article, so it's a little bit more, I don't know, verbose or complex than you would say of a and then say your regular media article, but it is deeply technical in the sense that it gives you blow by blow all the different changes in ROS 1, or between ROS 1 and ROS 2.
So Pramod, any thoughts on ROS 2 in particular, or just open source robotics, open source autonomous systems?
Well, I'll start by saying we're fans. We use ROS 1 and ROS 2 for different purposes. We probably would have already migrated completely to ROS 2, but there were some things that get technical where we had to remain with ROS 1 for the time being. But ROS 2 has actually been very helpful with some of the things we're doing with thrust vectoring and an outdoor vehicle with communications, BVLOS type stuff. And so yeah, and actually I would say the challenge has, well, first of all, I appreciate the article being shared because I hadn't seen that one. So that's a very informative, number one. And number two, finding talent out there when you're talking to people for the kind of things we do with UI and UX, our unique interface with our ground control stations. You have to find the right individuals that can actually learn ROS, because they don't come out of school like that. And unless Kat knows some people there.
Well, I would claim that a lot of them, that is one of the advantages to ROS 2 is they don't come out of every school knowing ROS, but true. More and more and more it is the case that that's what's being used to teach fundamental robotics. I could go through and list a lot of universities, and that's also why we produce things like the Turtlebot, right? Is to give people a beginning platform. But, to be honest, most undergrads don't actually touch robotics to begin with. At least it was never like that when I was an undergrad. So it's that's part of the problem. But the article, I think, when you point to specific use cases, what we really wanted to do with the article is look at the specific use cases and the value that the organizations are getting from those use cases, which is sort of a change from how we sort of approached things before, which was, does it work? Does it not work?
I was going to say, I love the 5 use cases and the explanation of how these different companies have incorporated ROS. I work with a lot of different companies, talking to them, interviewing them, and some of them that, have component partners or software partners. And a lot of those companies are very squeamish about saying, hey, I've got ROS 2 on board, or I've got modal AIs, right? Like autopilot or whatever. So I love that these companies said yes. And what I found really interesting was the Ghost Robotics land example. So I'm sure most people out there know they create the quadruped UGV, uncrewed ground vehicle, like, the little robo dog, if you will. It looks a lot like Boston Dynamics Spot. In fact, we talked about the lawsuit in a previous. Ghost Robotics has been on this show a couple times because I feel like it was San Francisco or somewhere in California where law enforcement was going to have a bunch of those on as part of their force, and then there was a whole big, kind of uprising about that. And I think there.
Oh, I can
Kat
speak
was
to
part
that
of
for a
that.
while because I was one of the people.
Oh, okay. All right, cool.
Yeah.
All right. So there's
Yeah.
that. And then Boston Dynamics sued them for IP violations, because if you look at the two vehicles, and there's different pieces and parts, right, that, just even to a layman's eye, you'd be like, wow, that looks very similar. But what I found interesting in this article was the fact that they attribute a lot of, part of that lawsuit, by the way, is interesting. Some of our engineers went over there, and then, oh, look how in like record time you guys were able to develop this thing. And what they say in this article is like, well, actually, Ross 2 leveled the playing field for us. You don't have to be a giant company to have leaps and bounds. I think the numbers they gave were 7.5 engineers over 4 years. Like just the rapidity at which they were able to develop their QUGV. And also, even during COVID, when they were not able to go out to the field or meet with clients and do things live, they utilized the ROS 2 simulator called Gazebo. And that was also a Cat. I noticed a theme throughout some of these other, the sea area was Mission Robotics, air was Auterion. NASA, right? They're using it for their volatiles investigating polar exploration rover mission, or Viper. This thing is going to be at the end of this year launching to the southern polar region of the moon to search for water ice. We talked about water ice before on this show as well. 100-day mission, and of course they're using the simulator, as well as Otto Motors, this industrial use case you talked about. Some fun facts there. They were able to scale up to 100 plus robots in their customer facilities. They believe it saved about $1 million and also $5 million over 5 years just using ROS 2, not to mention the hundreds of engineering hours by not, no pun intended, reinventing the wheel here. So just really chock full of great information. I love the simulator aspect, because I feel like that, to be able to fail forward in a virtual environment like that using a simulator, just right there saves money. You're not crashing or killing actual vehicles. So this is a really great article. I loved it.
Well, first you have to write the simulator, so we already saved you
well,
time
there's
there.
that
But
too.
what sold me on Ross, and this was, oh God, this was over 10 years ago, is I came into an organization. I had a friend who worked with Ross pretty in depth during his graduate work, and we both ended up working at this company in Boston, and it was just a mess. They were basically building a mapping car, like a Google mapping car, but with fancy thermal cameras. And they just hadn't made any progress. They had hardware. The hardware had been built, but the thing just wasn't working. And we sort of said on a long weekend, we said, screw it. We're just going to start with a green field, just use Ross and see what we can do. And we were able to, in 3 days, basically get more done than they had been able to do in like 3 years. And that was kind of when it sold it for me. It's like, we can't have, like, it's not going to work for me to sit down if I want to use 5 different sensors to write a driver for each sensor with a team of 3 or 4 or something like that. We have to rely on open source code and code that already exists to get where we need to go. And the productivity gains are
it's amazing how much people, when you look at the past, getting locked into proprietary islands, that it really ends up being an overall waste of human labor. I know I brought this up multiple times on the podcast, probably even last time we went live, because if you're literally starting from scratch to build the entire system, huge waste of time, especially as these open source systems grow. You could bet on their reliability, right? The basic functions become more set in stone, and then you could focus on making your products feature rich, or it's even possible sometimes that a field specific niche gets so commoditized that actually it's just all about marketing, and that's not a bad thing either. That you could reach that level of reliability, certitude, and usefulness to people on at that commercial scale. So yeah, I'm excited about ROS 2, but I want to ask some questions. Specifically, what is
Shoot.
the big paradigm shift that requires you to give it a new number, right? So it's not an incremental version. And then secondly, what are some of the trials that you're facing in terms of adoption? Because every big version like that, no matter what operating system or piece of software you're talking about, usually comes with that. So talk to that a little bit.
Well, so I think that the big change, right, is in the original ROS 1. What you did is, so if you have different parts of a robot, right? You'd say you have a sensor over here and you have an actuator over here and you have a brain in the middle, and moving the messages you basically have to move data, right, between different parts of the robot, make sense of it, and then send out other signals to make something do something. How you move that data, because some of it has to go really fast, some of it has to, needs to be reliable. That in ROS 1, the way we did that was like very bespoke, right? We kind of wrote, custom interfaces to move data in specific ways. And that worked to a point until you had situations, right, where, I want to have just massively huge robots or multiple robots in a system. Or I need better security with respect to, moving that data around inside of a network. And so really the biggest change was yanking out all of that sort of custom, message passing code, and then replacing it with an interface that allowed us to use basically various different standards. So the primary one that's used inside of ROS now is DDS, but we're starting to see people work on potentially using alternatives to DDS as well as that sort of message passing infrastructure. And so what that's done is, it's allowed you to move messages more reliably, have better control. We basically said, look, we are not experts at moving messages. We're gonna create the interface to allow you to do it. And then we're going to rely on other open source orgs or even proprietary orgs to build all that glue code for you. And you get to choose which one's going to work best for you. The problems are also the flip side of that sometimes, is that, we've created this, system where you can move messages, but how do we, it's sometimes not always working great out of the box for everyone's application. You actually have to go and tune it and set things up, and it's complex, and it adds complexity to a system. So it's a double-edged sword. We've made it, much, much more powerful for the power users, but sometimes it takes away from the ease of use for the new users. And balancing that out is I think, been one of the big challenges in the transition. And then there's just general, hey, there's all these ROS packages that people relied in ROS 1, tens of thousands of them basically. And we have to get all those package maintainers, just like Python, just like the Python 2 to Python 3 transition.
Bring that back up.
We have to get all those people, to decide that they want to go up.
There are people that still fight about that Python upgrade to this day.
Yeah. And so it just takes a while.
Yeah. I think the value proposition for ROS 2 makes sense, though.
Yeah, no, the only thing I was going to add to what Kat said with the kind of the power user high, I actually think that's not a bad thing, because that just advances technology and advances what you can do with that, the applicability of it. And it's not a low bar, it's a higher bar to entry as well. So if you're trying to do challenging things, it's challenging. And then, a tool like ROS 2 allows you to, tackle those things, but it's not for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you can't make anything less complex than it needs to be to actually, do the task it needs to do.
Yeah.
So I have a saying about this sometimes now, and it's always trying to balance like the new users with the super users, and it's like, you can't make brain surgery, something that everyone can do, right? And so like robotics is hard. We need to remember that. So we're not going to always be able to make it super easy. It is going to be challenging, and the question is,
don't tell the investors that little adage. All right, so we're going to take a quick break to thank our sponsors. We've added a new one. We've got Drone Up. Tom Walker is going to be appearing on our Full Tilt podcast next week. Super excited to have them on board. We have SAIC, Speedbird Aero, and Fixar. We want to thank our sponsors for making this show possible. Their support has helped quite a bit. All right, so we're going to move on to the third. Oh, actually, I got a comment from the chat. Want to call out One Vision Ariel for saying hello to everyone. So I don't think I've seen One Vision in a while, but nice to see you back. And Dawn, so you brought up F-16s getting retrofitted, it looks like, with autonomous systems. I have a lot of questions, but I want to hear your take first.
Well, first of all, spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen Top Gun Maverick, that this was kind of a theme of the show, like uncrewed versus crewed aircraft and what should be used for a particular mission and all of these things. And so that kind of intrigued me. But so what's happening here is called a Venom project. I also love the name. Gotta love the military picking out all those poisons and kind of horrible things to name their projects.
Makes it so easy to pitch it to the public.
I know, it's like, yeah, we're going for Venom
right?
here. And what is Venom? It's just refining an AI engine to fly a whole wide variety of today's and tomorrow's aircraft in line with the Air Force's Collaborate Combat Aircraft Program. And so we're talking about human machine air teaming concept, a variety of autonomous air vehicles and things of this nature. I'll tell you what's new about it. I'll tell you what's not new. So it's not like the Air Force hasn't been making kind of crewed aircraft into drones forever. I mean, I remember I was at Holloman Air Force Base. They were retrofitting F4s just to be essentially flying targets and blowing them up, if I recall correctly. So, having a normal aircraft become a quote unquote drone is not something new. In fact, they had the HAVE Radar 2 program 5 years ago. That was an F-16 drone. And then they had the XQ-58 Valkyrie and the X-62 Vista. That Vista was a modified F-16 to test and train some AI software. What's different about this, and this kind of gets back to what Kat was saying earlier, they're putting a lot more sensors on board. And, the idea is, radar, electronic warning systems, because look, these aircraft, when they actually go live in combat, they're going to be in contested environments. And so having a software that can assimilate all of these things and also fly that aircraft is going to be critical. And that's what they're doing. The Air Force is requesting $49.7 million for this project. And they hope to fly some out there on the test ranges at Edwards Air Force Base. So that's what this one's all about. Again, love the name, love the tie-in to Top Gun Maverick, and would love to hear everybody else's thoughts.
No, you want to go? Go first.
I was just going to say, Dom, I don't think Maverick would agree with you.
No, he wouldn't. No, for sure. Yeah. Let's put humans, into that Iranian mission. That's a great plan.
Yeah. So why retrofit rather than build systems from scratch? That's, to me, it almost seems like
money. Hello, money. Well, because look,
because we already burn enough money.
This is a test vehicle essentially. So, to create a whole new program of record. Plus, if they have a bunch of these laying around for whatever reason, which they probably do, for they're not in service for whatever reason, they can make them into test aircraft. But if there are pilots out there, test engineers, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the chat. But that's
so reuse and recycle. You think would be more economically efficient?
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was the case with the F4 drones. It was just like those were actually, I think, just outright decommissioned, and no one was flying those things. So it's like either you put them in the boneyard, or hey, let's put some AI on board and let's fly them and blow them up, see how that goes.
I'll also add, as an aerospace engineer, that you have a vehicle already. We're talking about the F-16 here in this case, that is capable of significant maneuverability and agility. And as Don pointed out, to kind of create that from scratch as an autonomous system, again, would be mind-blowingly expensive.
Yeah, but isn't it just as complicated to try and capture control over something that was completely designed for a human to control it? I would think that there'd be a lot of testing and failure in that process too. So that's kind of why I immediately went to, why wouldn't a system built from scratch be easier
What is it?
than kind of going down this whole long road? Kat, did you have something you want to say?
Well, Kat can speak to this
Well, I was going
because
to say,
she had a robot you were talking about. They've been designing for 3 years. They had the hardware. It was a matter of getting that software correct.
yeah, well, humans, I would imagine humans are the limiting factor on jets now, not jets themselves, right? Like
Yeah.
humans pass out after a certain number of Gs of vehicles.
Yeah, thinking about like
Yeah,
RC helicopter tricks, like you see these things do maneuvers that you would think would be physically impossible, right?
oh yeah, those are nuts. Yeah, I don't know. As a defense contractor, at some point, I like avionics expenses or systems are already just absurdly expensive, and then have to be maintained for 30 years. I can only imagine maintaining, 30 years from now, AI code for a jet like this. It's you know it's not going to be a good thing, because it's difficult to get a hold of the software to begin with, and God knows, everything they're going to put in there will immediately be outdated, I'd imagine.
Well, that's also a great point. I mean, the military is really going to this modular open systems, or MOSA approach. And so,
Yeah, we
I
discussed
don't
that with
know.
John McHale last week, so please check that episode.
That's true. We were at Military Embedded Systems magazine. So yeah, so how what open source things they're using, I have no idea here, but the goal is exactly that, Kat, to not have to use the same thing for 30 years, and to be able to plug and play as things need upgrade, just push those upgrades right pretty quickly.
Yeah, and there's multiple initiatives on that front, right? So the DIU is one. That's one that we're pretty familiar with in the drone space, but that's not the only one, correct, Dawn?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, look, the federal government in general has a lot of different laboratories that have technology transfer authorities. I mean, that NASA, was it called, the Viper project, probably is using Space Act agreements with people to be able to move some things along, right, with that. So you've got AFWorks, you've got
Right,
SoftWorks, you've got
AFWorks is another well-known one.
yeah, lots of different authorities that these different organizations have across the federal government. Now, we're talking Department of Interior, FBI, like they all have interesting legal authorities to be able to partner with industry to get the technology that they need on board quicker. Pramod, it looks like you had something you wanted to say.
Oh no, I was just going to say that they're really focused on bringing that innovation, as you know, Don. There's a lot of programs. We've been part of AFWorks and those things as well, and it's still challenging to get to a program of record, but at least you're getting a look, and you're getting your foot in the door.
Right. The SBIR program, the Small Business Innovation and Research Grants, or an STTR, lots of different ways that the government has to leverage funding to work with innovative startups and even very established companies to bring technology on board to the warfighter or to the mission.
Didn't they just raise the STTR or SBIR funding limits, or they were at least discussing it? Because it hasn't changed in 25 years.
Oh, wow.
It's still like $120,000. It's this, like when I got out of college, it's the same amount of money, I think, as when I got out of college, which has been eaten into by inflation.
That's a great question. I'm writing a note to research that, because I don't know that answer.
We've got some good comments from
Kat, my experience. In my experience, it varies per branch, and you're right. It has, the phase ones are very small, and typically you lose money on those. It's when you get to the phase two that it starts to make sense. Okay, they actually want to develop a product here.
So isn't that counterintuitive to the program itself? Is that the small SBIR should allow
where
like
the
one
highest
or two people
risk
to go
is,
and do a
We've
pilot?
got some comments from the chat. I just want to make sure we don't miss them. Mary Christine Bodine, hope I got your last name right. Good morning. And Christopher Jenseth again. They've had unmanned F-16s for target practice for years. So I guess this is just an evolution of that then. And Shannon Knutson, what do you think of the proposed pause on AI dev related to your fields? we'll probably actually get into that into the next segment.
Oh yeah, it's actually
Yeah.
a perfect segue. I don't know if anybody has more comments on my article. It was just a fun one, but yours, Mike, is a lot meatier, and it does get to Shannon's question. So maybe unless anybody else has thoughts on this F-16 one, let's move on.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to move on to mine because it's mine, right? So, Italy orders ChatGPT blocked, citing data protection concerns. So everybody knows that the EU is a little bit more strict on data privacy, let's say. But the Italian DPA specifically cited access, or children having access to the app, and the right to correct incorrect data about yourself. So, or I think it's actually the right to rectification is the specific term that was used. And honestly, the current form of ChatGPT does kind of fail both of these benchmarks by my best assessment, because you don't want to know what it will generate about you that's inaccurate. It doesn't know. And the people who made it don't know. And in terms of access to children, that's something that could have easily been rectified from the get-go. And the Italian DPA is already citing a case that was won, which was, I believe, Replica, an app that was just a chatbot where children were having access. And honestly, I think I just read, and who knows, this might be sensationalized, but a man killed himself based on advice that he got from ChatGPT.
Oh my God.
Clearly, that person had issues that they had to deal with, and probably should have sought more professional help than the chatbot could provide. And even if it's just a made-up story, you can easily see the weight that people put into the conversations here. And children specifically are more, I guess, more at risk for misinterpreting what the capabilities of the bot are. Dawn, you had a question?
Yeah, no, I have I just want to do a really quick overview of the GDPR, because this is significant. This is really significant for AI in Europe in general. And, look, I'm not going to give you an entire GDPR 101, but I'm going to roll through some of the key rights and protections just so everybody has this in their mind as Kat and Pramod talk a little bit more about this article. So the whole idea between the GDPR, which is pan-EU, by the way, across the entire European Union, is data protection by design and default. So the idea is design this stuff up front. This isn't let's screw stuff up and ask forgiveness later. And that's kind of where OpenAI is. It's not a good place to be. So number one, transparency principles, meaning if they're scraping information, they're using your information, there's a consent issue here. You're supposed to be getting consent from people before you do that.
So that'd be continued training. So you're inputting questions and it's using that to retrain its data model.
Exactly. Child safety, you raised this, Mike, this idea that there should be age verifications at a minimum and things of this nature to protect children, from things on the internet. Mike, you mentioned this right to rectification of erroneous information. We all know that Chat AI has been hallucinating, as they call it, air quotes, hallucinating, filling in gaps of information and making up stuff that's just completely wrong. There's also a big data breach protection aspect to this regulation, that there has to be immediate reporting and things of this nature if information gets leaked. And in fact, OpenAI had a conversation history leak just recently that exposed users' payment information, and this really pivotal and interesting right to be forgotten in the GDPR. What does that mean? If there's information that's inaccurate or outdated out there, people have the right to ask the company to remove it. And so just put your brain around those principles and concepts for a second, and then think about ChatGPT and other AI. So I'm going to punt it over to, let's just say, Kat first. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
I mean, I don't disagree with doing. I don't know if I'd necessarily say restrict completely, but I think, there's a lot to be said about building new technology and then putting it out in the world without actually user testing. It's just like, hey, we built this model, cool, go nuts. Like, we don't know what it's going to do to people. We don't know how it actually functions. We can't even articulate all of the test cases that would be necessary to verify that this thing works. But hey, let's just release it onto an unsuspecting public. Now that said, I think, I think a lot of the stuff going on right now is a pretty deep hype cycle. I haven't, when I have played with these things, it's like, hey, they were mostly incorrect.
Yeah.
But I don't understand. I don't understand like what the value is that I'm going to have this thing automatically summarize an email for me, and then I can write a summary and it'll make it into a long email to send to someone. Like, that's the only thing I'm seeing.
I was talking with Ramon about this literally yesterday, about because a family member had sent me a video about, look at what ChatGPT 4 is capable of, and then in the video it fails to answer the question 4 times until the person constantly corrects it. And then it gets the right answer. I'm like, well, you gave it the answer 4 times and it still got it wrong. Like, that's, that's unbelievably wrong by any other systems evaluation. So, and I like this technology in GitHub Copilot. And I think that's actually the useful future of this, is specific task tuned models where you're not expecting it to be right 100% of the time, but it's not going to just generate absolute nonsense. And I think there should just kind of be protections for that. So at least I think this case will raise the issues properly.
There's some, I was going to say, there's some historical context too. Like Elise, right? Like 30 years ago or 35 years, probably longer than that. I don't even know what year. I think it may have been in the late 70s that we created chatbot, AI chatbots, psychology chatbots, and like, it's in the history books, but does it have any bearing on modern technology whatsoever?
Well, even back then, people thought they were talking with something that was capable of giving them therapeutic advice. So that goes back to even what is the unverified example of the man committing suicide. Yeah.
Pramod has a question or a comment.
Sorry. What do you?
No, that's okay. I was just gonna maybe for our listeners or viewers, kind of bring up sort of what I think of when with all this stuff and I think Kat's right that we're in a hype cycle. It is amazing. I can tell you that fellow CEOs are very excited to use these tools for like marketing and things like that, and I can definitely see the value in that. But it makes me think about some of the broader questions that are brought up in movies that we've seen. So one example, you just mentioned the psychiatric help. So if you remember with the actor's name, but the movie was called Her, where the main character, Joaquin, yes, it was Joaquin, yeah. And then the other movie that the beginnings of what we're seeing here makes me think of is iRobot with Will Smith, where you had in that case laws that were created. In that movie they had the 3 laws of robotics, right? And so it makes me think that we're at the beginning of some of this stuff that's going to now just become mainstream legal sort of argument for a long time as AI continues to grow.
Well, 2 things. You said the term legal, and we talked about how people are trying to infuse AI into the courtroom to help give legal advice to people as they're defending, minor tickets and whatnot, which I think is, as a lawyer, absolutely insane and wrong. But number 2, Shannon Knutson had a great question about this open letter. Elon Musk, we've talked about Elon so much on this show. How can you not talk about Elon? So here we go again. Signed this letter basically with, I think it was 123, 128 other people, experts in the field saying, hold on a minute, we need to cease production and use of this technology until we figure out, the ramifications. And then UNESCO actually just put out a paper saying, y'all need to be using the principles we already published. I think it was a couple years ago. They had recommendations for AI, almost like what you're saying, Pramod, the 3 principles. They had, I forget the number, it was more than 3, but recommendations for AI. So, lots of talk about this. What are the implications? What are the ethical principles underlying this? Do you just release things into the wild before they're tested? And boy, let's not even talk about who's going to be liable if that person actually killed themselves. I would love to have some thoughts, Pramod, Kat, Mike, on Shannon's question about this letter, this open letter.
Well, I'll go first. Everybody that signed that was actually verified as the real person.
What? So AI wrote it. Oh my gosh. Wow.
Business. But yeah, look, Steve Wozniak signed that, and he's not somebody I think is an anti-tech person. So I think there's something to be said for that in setting a tone that they might even just be trying to send a signal to lawmakers like, hey, this is not like the last tech revolution, or you really kind of need to take a look at this, because if the results are going to be human-like in any shape or form, or interpretable as human-like in any shape or form, then you're going to have to set rules, because humans are going to be interacting with these differently than machines, where the results are well, these are deterministic too, but where they're traceably deterministic, right? So like, I think back on this episode of The Gilded Age where there was a train crash, and it was because somebody used an over or a broken part, or a part that they knew wasn't verified to be safe. Just because that was essentially a system running on its own didn't mean there wasn't somebody down the chain that was at fault. And I think trying to project the idea that nobody's responsible for how these things behave, because that's an easy way to sidestep legal responsibility.
I have a question for everybody, because I'll be honest, like I hate talking about something I haven't read. I didn't read that open letter. Has anybody actually read it? Because Shannon's question is very specific. How could it impact the AI in your use cases, Pramod and Kat? And I don't believe it would. I thought it was focused more on ChatGPT in particular, as opposed to AI writ large.
I think it's scoped to just large language models.
That's what I thought. Okay, yeah. So yeah.
That's the way I interpret it as
Okay,
well.
all right. That was my understanding. But again, I hate commenting on something I haven't actually had a chance to read yet. But yeah.
And I would just say I agree with Mike that it was kind of a message. It says, hey, let's just pause and think, more than anything, because it's hard to stop progress, right? So that's kind of the gist I got out of it as well.
Yeah, it's kind of a complex just situation, right? Because like I don't particularly, I see that there are going to be problems with large language models, but there's already been just a huge number of problems with depending on your flavor of like deep learning or large language models, or just traditional machine learning, or just data collection, right? Because data collection is the foundation of all of this stuff. There are problems with all of it. And we do, on one hand, I really think we probably do need some legislation around how these things happen. At the same time, I watched the news last week, and I don't know if we have people that are necessarily capable of having those kind of conversations.
Yeah. Well,
and so, which means it might be up to us.
That's a great point, Kat. As a foil to this, I love what the FAA does in a certain respect, where they gather people from industry to inform their rulemaking by creating these, aviation rulemaking committees up front that grapple with the hard topics, because they are experts. Like the Beyond Visual Line of Sight rulemaking committee, as an example. I know people have criticisms about who's on the committee and all this. Let's get past that. I'm just talking about this concept of getting people, the smart people in a room, to talk about the real issues that they face every day that need to be resolved, and their recommendations to inform whether it's laws or rulemaking. But I agree with you, Kat. What's the most frightening is you have lawyers or Congress people like in a back room somewhere that have no clue about the technology, putting pen to paper, and then everybody's stuck with some really horrible law that makes no sense. So I think that collaborative effort is really key.
Yeah, to jump on what you're saying, Dawn, and also kind of what Kat kicked off. You know, Midjourney just made some changes to its system to kind of react to bad press, where the Pope was put in a nice puffy jacket. Yeah, and Donald Trump
really
was
cute.
put in pictures where he was arrested. And like, why did that need to me, I've been able to Photoshop funny stuff like that for years, and we didn't shut down Photoshop over that, you know? So there is sometimes an overzealous kind of reaction to this technology. And I think that's actually part of in a reaction to the marketing, that it's going to take over everything and we're not going to be able to trust anything ever again. It's like, well, how much do we trust now? Especially since this letter isn't even verifiable, you know? So what were you going to say, Kat? I see you simmering there.
Well, I would just say the other side of it is like, how hard would it be for them just to put a watermark on everything that says like, look, this is synthetic. Like I do understand the case that, you know, you can slap an image up on. I was fooled by one the other day, and you're like, oh, that's not real. But how, you know, just for general consumption, you know, if you're going to offer this to the public, how difficult would it be to put a watermark?
I'm laughing so hard internally right now because I'm thinking all those Sports Illustrated model edition, you know, the model editions and all the watermarks that would be across those women's bodies, like, this was actually modified, you know, because look, I agree, this stuff has been used for years, you know, just not to this extent. And so there has to be a rational, you know, kind of middle ground here. And what does that look like? Some principles to guide it versus laws. I don't know. But, you know, all you smart people out there that are working on this stuff, get your own group together. Like, in other words, why do you have to wait? I've told people this even in the drone industry. I'm not going to get into details right now, but you know, there are a couple outstanding issues. And I said, why don't you write your own like white paper with your own proposal? Why not? Like, nothing's stopping you from doing that. You could like kickstart the discussion, give somebody something to think about. You know, so anyway, there's something in the chat.
I just wanted to get back to One Visionarial because he's been participating. So smart people are few and far between these days, smiley face. Like, some of the lawmakers have no knowledge of how drones work, both GPS and FPV builds. They fail to apply logic and common sense. Yeah, I mean,
that's true.
Well, we never had perfect politicians, like, though, you know.
Not disparage like our entire the Congress, but
well,
you know, like
them,
they can't be educated.
The percentage of engineers, like, is it never been lower?
Yeah, that's a big problem, right? Like, is the Congress representative of all the disciplines that are, you know, kind of required to help forge good laws around this stuff. So,
have they ever been? But Pramod, what do you have?
No, I think I already said what I wanted to, which is, I think we're at the dawn of a new sort of, you know, era here. So, yeah, exactly. of this sort of being, you know, topic that's going to be around for a while as things progress. I don't think this is. I think this is just the beginning of all this. Hence why I referenced some of the futuristic movies.
No, you're right. I mean, and that iRobot, well, that's the pre-slap wheel, right? I mean, that's like way back machine in a way. But you know, just to put a plug in real quick, at our Law Tech Connect workshop, we had a spectacular AI panel last year, and you can find that for free on AUVSI's AVIL platform. So it was Natalie Detmer from Gunderson Detmer law firm. She's like one of the top AI lawyers. Pat Houston, retired Brigadier General from the United States Army. Paul Mullen from Dragonfly, because they have the virtual, I think it's a vital intelligence platform that collects biometrics. So check that out, because they talked about these ideas of principles, and Pat, of course, helped shape some of the DoD policies. So really great stuff. Check that out if you have a chance. And come to our event this year.
Well, we've got some other stuff coming up this week too, Dawn. You want to tell the audience about that?
Yeah, great stuff as usual. So this Wednesday, On the Dawn of Drones, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, AVSI Platforms, Aerovigilance / Counter UAS Hub, co-creators Tom Adams and Casey Flanagan, former FBI agents, will be on the show talking counter UAS information. It's going to be awesome. Thursday, we have 1 p.m. Eastern, Matrix Space will be on our Clubhouse with Maggie Schuster. David Cameron will be joining her. And then next week, as Mike already mentioned, our sponsor and the CEO of DroneUp, Tom Walker, will be on our leadership podcast, The Full Tilt, Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern. So don't make sure you don't miss any of those amazing shows.
All right. It's been a great show. I want to thank our guests, both Pramod and Kat, for bringing up some great topics and adding their out here.